Welcome to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. I'm Allie Rose, certified clinical hypnotherapist and subconscious success coach. I help my clients stop self-sabotage and feel safe to create more wealth, worth, and wellness from within. If you find yourself stuck repeating the same unhelpful patterns in your life, health, business, or relationships, even after all the mindset work, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll hear deep dives into the hidden beliefs shaping your life and live hypno coaching sessions where someone shifts a block in real time. Because willpower isn't the problem, your subconscious story is. And when you shift it at the root, everything else begins to change. So let's dive in. As you listen, consider, what roles did you learn to play in your family? Were you the peacemaker, overachiever, the invisible one? Were you taught directly or indirectly that it's safer to stay small, quiet, or agreeable? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting something different than what your family had? And what patterns do you carry that may have protected someone before you, but are now holding you back? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness and the freedom that comes when you realize that you didn't choose these patterns, but you can choose whether they continue with you. Hello. Welcome back to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. We are so excited to be back with you today, where we will be talking all about subconscious generational patterns, how they get passed down, how you can recognize them, what to do about them if you want to break them. But before we dive in, Safiya, welcome back. And thank you for being here with me again today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Even before we hit record, we were already having a juicy conversation, so I'm looking forward to this already.
Yeah. So obviously, I have to say that this conversation was spurred on by you. So I'm excited to hear some of your questions and just about, what you're curious about or just what will come up from this conversation. So how are you feeling about diving in?
I'm feeling really good. Part of how it came up, we have a previous episode where we kind of discussed it a little bit, and it was one of those things. I think every time we sort of talk, I feel like there are things that I I've wondered about. I've had, like, oh, tell me, I wonder a bit more about this, and then when it comes up within the context of hypnotherapy, I like it because it starts to give shape to the idea, as well as something that a person can do something about it if it is a problem for them. So when it came up in the conversation, then I was like, ooh, I almost want to have a full out conversation about it. So thank you for diving into it with me.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. So one thing I want to start with is, how are we defining generational patterns? I'm just gonna be straight. Like, I grew up in church, and I always heard about these generational curses.
Mm.
And I then left the church, and I started to think about a lot of the things that I'd learned about there, and just try to see them in a different context. Try to think, is this something is this something I still believe in? Is this something I don't believe in? And I definitely could see generational pattern, generational curses, however people see them. I can definitely see how things get passed on. And I learned about it in the healthcare world, when people talked about how health behaviors are passed on through families. And so just I've thought about it. I thought about it from a lot of different angles, but I'm curious, how are you defining a generational curse or a generational pattern? I would say generational pattern, but you can call it
Yeah.
whatever you want.
So I would say that generational patterns are ways of thinking, reacting, coping, or believing that get passed down from one generation to the next. And this is really without anyone ever sitting you down and saying, here, believe this. It really happens in subtle ways. It's the stories that you hear growing up, it's in the behaviors that you observe, in the emotional atmosphere of your home. It's what wasn't said just as much as what was, and absorbing your family's beliefs about love or money, safety, success, identity, not because you chose them, right? You didn't like go to the store and choose out the generational patterns that you wanted to have, but because your your nervous system picked up on them and decided this is how the world works. And I also think there's some biological aspects to that as well of passing things down biologically. So,
Yeah. And that is something I wanted to ask because a few years ago I learned quite a bit about epigenetics, and they just talked about the sort of biological aspects that may be passed down. Not and it's interesting that you talk about nervous system patterning because what I understood, and I guess someone can correct me if I'm wrong, what I understood about the sort of epigenetic link is sort of how your genes change in the presence of that stress, that particular type of stress. And so it is the impact that that thing will have on you. So if you're talking about an epigenetic pattern of being fearful around using your voice, that's just a random example. You might think, "Oh, okay, that may be something you've grown up with. Yes, absolutely. But if you came from an environment where people have used their voice and it's gotten them into trouble, there may also be almost like a nervous system stress that comes up when you try to do this thing related to that topic. So the sort of epigenetic link is there's not a gene for speaking up, but it's that nervous system response is very heightened because of the patterns that have been passed down. And what do you're looking at me and I'm like, am I saying something
yeah.
terribly wrong?
No, no, not at all. I mean, there's research showing that babies in utero respond to their mother's stress, tone of voice, even the mother's relationship with the father or the world around them, right? So
Yeah.
if you think about it from kind of a passing down, it's like, well, my grandmother had aspects of her life that were passed down by her mother, and then that got passed down to, my mother, who then, it's like a basic blueprint, and then it gets swirled in
Mm.
with that particular person's, life experience, and then that gets passed down to you, right? So, does that make
That's
sense?
interesting. It does, it makes perfect sense. What is the subconscious link there? Because I know obviously you work a lot with the subconscious, so how does the subconscious come into play there?
Well, interestingly, when I was thinking about this a bit more, I was thinking about how when I do sessions with uh pregnant women, and I mean they have the baby, inside of them at the time that we're doing. And so what I will often have them do is envision putting a bubble around the baby, a protective bubble around the baby, and, because the subconscious is always listening. I think that that's the thing. The subconscious, it's like this sponge that's kind of absorbing information to figure out, like, beliefs about ourselves, the world, other people, what's safe, what's not. And so we put a bubble around the baby and just, command that bubble that, like, anything that is not for the baby bounces right off of the protective bubble.
Mm.
But I think it's like that's how it's linked to the subconscious, is that our subconscious is constantly pulling in, you know, information from the world around us to make sense of, like, who am I? What is this world about that I'm living in? And then as
Mhm.
kids, we're highly suggestible. We're in a highly suggestible brain state, like a sponge, taking in everything as truth. And so because we're so dependent on caregivers for survival, we internalize their struggles, their rules, their roles as to the way things are, right?
Mm. One of the things I am curious about is you talked about generational patterns being as much about what is not said as what is said. How does the subconscious perceive what is not said? Is it about the sort of conclusions that we make? Like, I'll give a pretty simple example. Years ago, I was doing some cooking with a friend of mine, and her daughter was there. She was a lot younger at the time. She's grown now, but she was young at the time. And my friend cooked something and she gave it to me to taste, and I was like, "Oh no, let's add some stuff." And she later on, she said to her mom, she's like, "Did you guys have an argument?" Like, she said, "Ugh," to what you could, and she was like, "I don't even remember that," because we that wasn't what was happening, but she'd really formed a conclusion in her mind as a child about what that interaction meant, even though it meant something completely different. So I'm always curious about that with the subconscious, like how does it interpret? Is it more that we interpret and then it gets fed into the subconscious? Like, how does what is not said sort of get onboarded there?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it, communication is not just about what's being said.
Of course not.
So, communication is also about perception, about what we
Mm,
perceive is happening as well. I think it's part of what's wired into us, again, to keep us alive, to keep us safe, is I've had experiences where I'm walking down the street and it's not about what someone has said to me, but maybe someone walks by me and it's just the two of us walking by each other. Something in my body feels I need to be more on alert or I need to be more aware, right? I think we've all maybe had those experiences. I think women
mm,
have those experiences. And so it's not that someone said something to me, it's that there's some part of me, this other sense that is picking up on what's not being said, but it's still being communicated to me through what the other person is putting off
mm.
from them. So I think that kids also pick up on what's not being said in a home as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And I remember learning years ago, like 70% of communication is not verbal, which
Mhm.
blew my mind at the time and still kind of does to this day. And you think about the facial expressions and all of that. But I do think a part of it is also that feeling, right? That, okay, it's almost like instinct or intuition, like
Yes.
something, something's not right here. I need to be more on alert or whatever the case may be. Or the opposite being true. Like sometimes I meet somebody and I'm like, this is my best friend now. Like I feel safe and comfortable around this person.
Right. Absolutely.
So given that we just talked about maybe a biological link, we talked about that subconscious link, we talked about children in a home and they're sponges. So I guess the question is then, are we really starting from zero? Like whenever I think about change and making change, it's almost like this idea that you're trying to change things that you're not even aware of. Because obviously, I always think to myself, like, my childhood was normal for me until I've met other people and realized, oh, people grow up in completely different environments. What are some common generational beliefs or patterns that you have seen when you work with clients or just maybe, in yourself? I can tell you a few of mine if that's allowed, but I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear you've sort of heard or experienced.
I mean, there's so many, right? So a lot of times what I see is, love means sacrificing yourself or you have to work twice as hard to be worthy. A big one is it's not safe to be seen. And then a very common one is money is hard to come by and it's not for people like us. And then I would say one that I see a lot with women is good girls don't take up space. So,
Mm,
or, it's kind of like seen and not heard kind of thing. Like it's
mm,
your looks, you are praised for how pretty you look, but you're not praised for what you have to say, and so therefore, I find a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, it's difficult for them to take up space in their lives because they feel like they should be seen and they should be beautiful, but they should not be heard.
mm. Yeah, okay. I recognize so many of those. Even if I don't feel them in myself, I recognize them in others and also in society as well. I think that's one thing that makes it really hard sometimes to even recognize the generational patterns because society can reinforce them in ways that we kind of just feel like they're truth as opposed to being a belief. So good girls fill in the blank of anything there. I feel like a lot of that can definitely be reinforced by society in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and what happens? do you think as a result of these generational patterns, how do they then show up? I know some of them will be obvious if somebody feels like it's not safe to be seen, then they may not put themselves out there. But how are some other ways that these may show up?
It's so varied. And I think what you said is they get reinforced by society, and that in and of itself is generational, right?
Mm,
I think about, well, I just celebrated my 40th birthday, and I think about now I'm in that phase where I'm looking at younger generations and I'm thinking about if I had grown up now, how different my life might
mm,
be, because there are things that people who are in their teens and 20s now believe to be true about themselves because of the generation that they are growing up in that I didn't believe was true or appropriate for me, right? So I think it's interesting that you say that, because it's not only individually that we pass things down generationally, but I think it's also culturally and societally that things get passed down generally generationally as well. And I think that that can have a huge impact on what we believe is possible for ourselves in the world that we live in.
yeah, and I think I'll give an example of that. So I grew up in the Caribbean and I don't think I realized until I was well into adulthood some of the sort of like beliefs about work. I have a friend who spent a long time in the corporate world and then decided to start her own business. And she's like, her own family was like, "What are you doing? Go and get a proper job," type of thing. And it's just this idea around what is work and what is available and what is worth pursuing, right? And I think I can see if you feel that way, that you may not take an avenue that you might otherwise take, or you might not put the effort in. We talked a few weeks ago about self-sabotage, and you may show up in that way of like, I really want this thing. I really want to start this business, but I don't genuinely believe that this is a legitimate way to live my life. And so I'm not really showing up in the way that I might otherwise improve my chances of success. So I can definitely see how that would show up even in some of that self-sabotage as well. So let's talk a bit about the nervous system. We sort of mentioned it up at the top of the conversation in terms of responding to those triggers. I guess that's the only word I can think to use. What role or what role does the nervous system play in that and in generational patterns as a whole?
Your nervous system holds on to sometimes what your mind thinks it's moved past. I mean, there's the very popular book, The Body Keeps a Score. Right.
Mm,
And so the whole idea behind that is that your body is still carrying things, even if you logically or consciously believe that you've moved past things. So you might know logically that your parents did the best that they could, or you might understand that, you don't have to move through the world in the same ways that they did. But your body, your nervous system, still reacts in a certain way. Like if you're a parent, when your child cries, or your partner raises their voice, or if your bank account dips, because it's wired to interpret those moments through an old lens. So the
mm,
nervous system, the body, it is keeping score in some ways. And I think that that's why we can consciously know something but still be holding on to an old pattern. And trauma, especially intergenerational trauma, doesn't always pass through stories. Sometimes it passes through silence, through tension, through parents flinching or freezing. So even if you
mm.
process the thoughts, if your body still feels like the past is happening now, that pattern isn't done being played out yet. It's still something that needs to be tended to.
Yeah. And, we may have discussed this before, but in this context, I want to ask then, does does that sort of nervous system response go on to drive people's behaviors?
So if anybody's listened to any of my past coaching episodes, every single time that we talk to the part that has created the issue, I will always ask the, the person in the session, the caller, I will say, once we've addressed the part, does the part feel any differently in your body? And the answer is 99.9% of the time, yes, the part feels differently. And that's because we've shifted some thoughts, we've shifted some beliefs, and so therefore you feel differently within your body. It's just this loop that kind of feeds on one another between when you feel something, then it amps up the beliefs, the negative beliefs or the fearful thoughts. And when you think those thoughts, then it amps up the nervous system response, which is, maybe increased heart rate, sweatiness, hot flushes, those kinds of things. And then the more you feel that, the more that it amps up the thoughts of like, I'm dying right now. It goes from like, I can't drive across this bridge to I'm dying, right?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So I suppose one of the things that's difficult about generational patterns is that they get so connected and intricately wound into your family relationships, right? Because the example I gave earlier about the friend and the business is like that's then wound up into the relationship you may have with that parent or whatever the case may be. So I'm curious, what role does that relationship or loyalty, what roles do you find that those play when it comes to generational patterns? Maybe guilt, guilt about upsetting a parent if you feel like you're going to do something outside of what might be accepted in that family. So, what role do you find that plays?
I think that it's interesting because people will often say to me very kind of like defensively, like when they first come in, is I don't want to have a conversation with my mom about this. And I always
Mm.
say, you don't have to have a conversation with said parent or whoever it is that maybe has passed something down to you. You don't have to, invite them over for dinner and invite them into your healing. You don't have to get anyone's permission to really break that cycle, right? It's something that you do inside yourself. It's something that you do in terms of reparenting yourself, changing the way that you speak to yourself. So often what I have people do is I have them look at, well, what did you actually want or need as a child? How did you need to be treated as a child, and then can you give that to yourself, right? And so I think that also when love and pain get tangled up, it's easy to believe that honoring your family means repeating their patterns. But
Yeah.
real love isn't about just reenacting the past, right? It's about maybe honoring your family by choosing something different. You can and recognizing you can still love your family and you can still say, I'm going to live differently or I'm going to choose something differently. Those two things don't need to be mutually exclusive. They can live within the same space. I love my family. And now that I know better, I'm going to do better. I'm going to choose something different. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I like that sort of way of looking at it because the truth is, I think most parents actually want their children to have different lives in a way. Like it's so interesting how, you sort of have things passed down to you, or you may, be concerned about passing it down to your own children when every person I know who's a parent, including, people, my parents' generation, they've done things so that children can have a better life.
Right.
Right. So I think to me, that is the biggest reason to think that honoring your family may not be repeating their pattern because ultimately they if they care about you, then for them, they will see that as a success, even if it's not the same way that they've done it. Hopefully. And they might not, right? They might not. But as you said, you don't need permission anyway. So it's just kind of, I guess, maybe separating those things out between the sort of care you have for your family and the route that you may want to take in life.
Yeah, I mean, it's sticky. I think that if we were to ask all parents if they want better for their children than what they had for themselves, like you said, I think that they would say yes. However, in practice, I have seen
Mm,
it play out where parents really can have a difficult time when when their children choose a different route or
mm,
when there can be some shaming that happens if their child gets more successful than them, right? Like, "You've gotten too big for your britches," or, like, different things that kind of say, "Oh, you're stepping out of maybe our family pattern. Look at you. Like, aren't you special?" Even though So it's very sticky. And that's where I think you have to recognize when it's a familial pattern playing out, and also give yourself the permission to say, I see that. I honor that. I understand that your life looked this way. Maybe you chose this path. Your life was difficult. And I have compassion for that. And I'm choosing something else. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that I definitely get. What is one subconscious belief that you have let go of? I can tell a bit about one of mine as well, if that if that's allowed. But yeah, what's one subconscious belief that you have let go of over time?
Oh, geez. So I feel like I come from a line of women who were very strong because they had no other choice. So I feel like accepting help, resting, letting myself feel supported or be supported has felt unsafe. At times, it still does, even though it's something that I deeply craved, right? I had to unlearn this idea that asking for support, that it didn't make me weak. It actually makes me more free. And I think that, you know, I can still be strong and be supported. I don't need to just push through, power through, do things all on my own, in order to be strong. And I won't go into this one, but I think we all carry lots of beliefs about money. Oh my gosh, so many things about money in my family. We grew up very blue collar. I've done a lot of work. I'm in a trauma of money course right now. And looking back, you just see how many money beliefs. So that's for those people, or, just negative thoughts about people with money. I feel so lucky that in my life, I actually oddly have been able to be a part of a community where it was a lot of really wealthy people. And I didn't even really know that they were very wealthy because they didn't really talk about it a lot, but they were very, this was whenever I was older in my adulthood. And so a lot of my money beliefs kind of got like shattered then, because there were all these wealthy people that I was surrounded by, and they were doing so many good things, like building youth centers and helping people with medical expenses and opening their homes to people who needed a place to stay. And so I think for me, that's one of the things is like money beliefs around, what people with money do, what they look like. But then that really got shattered in my 20s because I was surrounded by all of these really wealthy people who were doing good things. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was very interesting. I think I expected them to act in a certain way. And when they didn't, and when they were so much more kind, open, generous, caring, giving, it just opened up a whole other lens in my mind, another window in my mind. So, yeah. What about you?
So I would say that a lot of mine were around, I would say, legitimacy. I think I must have been in my 30s when I realized I had these ideas about what it means to be a proper adult, right? Like these ideas around, and a proper adult also being a woman. And so, like, I'll give some really tiny examples of things. Like, I was chatting to a friend about it the other day, about like buying pre-chopped onions. Like, I know that sounds wildly insignificant, but for me, that always would have been like, you're lazy. You chop your own onions, right? Like, or having someone come and clean your house, right? It's like, you should be able to clean your own house. You should be able to do, and just these ideas around, being a proper adult is that you can look after your house and you can do all the cooking and you can do all. And I say that, I'm sure there are men out there that don't have those ideas around what being a proper adult is, because on top of being a person, I'm also a woman. So for me, those ideas around what you should be able to do. Yes, you should be able to do all cooking and do. If you can't, there's some sort of defect there, right? So what helped me with that a lot was meeting people from different cultures, actually, who just had totally different ideas about what the world was like. I have a really good friend who's Nigerian. And so for me, this is a good example because this is another Black woman. Okay. So this is not even, it's not even me feeling like that's for those people. Like, this is somebody who feels like another, sister of mine. And she's like, oh no, they grew up, everybody had helpers. That was just standard. Like everybody has a helper. And in fact, that is a part of being in community, giving someone else a job. What? And I was just like, what? Like, what is this? And that really pulled me away from this idea. It's like, actually, what if giving someone a job of something that they're good at, they're helping me, I'm helping them as well. I'd never really been able to think about it that way until I started meeting people from other communities, other cultures, and being like, okay, there's like whole communities and economies out there running like this. And that was how I got a lot more into not just being able to accept that support and kind of dismantle that idea of like what it means to be a proper adult, like not cutting your own onions or whatever, like that's crazy. But also about the value of intentionally supporting other people's businesses. So so much came out of that. That was unexpected because then it made me think differently about charging people and all of that. Like all of those things were kind of wrapped up in those ideas, which I wasn't aware of.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and you talk about the money stuff. For me, I think I think I'm kind of still working on it now, and it's ideas around money and creativity and again legitimacy, right? Like what is a legitimate way to earn money? I'm still trying to figure that out, but like those to me are the things that I feel like I'm dismantling for myself or have dismantled for myself.
Right. I think that I want to touch on the one that you said. It was like again, and it's so funny. I mean, you and I obviously grew up very differently. However, I
Mm,
would say the same thing. Like a huge value of mine was being able to like cook and clean as a woman, right? And so my ex and I, when we moved to Nicaragua, I mean, just the norm, like, we had people who were kind of welcoming us there, and they were, like, giving us names of housekeepers. And I was one, at first, I was a bit offended, number 1, the homes in Nicaragua were so different than they are here in the US. They're open air, and it downpours rain during the rainy season, and then during the dry season, it gets so much more dust in the home than you would ever get here in the States. And so it was explained to me by some other people within the expat community there, this is actually part of supporting the local economy, is by having someone come and clean your home, and so we ended up having a woman named Ada come twice a week, and it felt so uncomfortable for me at first, but the beautiful thing is that she ended up bringing her daughter, and I was able to help her daughter with her English and her Spanish. And I still stay in touch with them, and, her daughter has just gone on to leaps and bounds in terms of her education. I really look back at that time so fondly. They became a part of our family and being able to support them in that way. And it's so much less about, me being better than them in any way or lazy in any way or being less of a woman in any way. It really was about supporting local economy. So I love that you brought that up because I think it's funny, we were raised in different cultures, yet that was
hmm,
still something that was deeply ingrained within both of us, right?
completely. And it's so true. And that's what I mean when I talk about that also the sort of societal impact on those generational patterns because two women, different countries, different lives, different upbringings, similar ideas around it. And moving to different or not moving, but being in a different culture is a thing that showed like, people live in different ways. And you talk about this idea about being better than. And the funny thing is that when I had that conversation with my friend, she was like, I trust this person to raise my child. There's no way. But the better than thought never even crossed her mind. When this person came into her house and was cooking and cleaning and helping her with her daughter, she's like, to her, that's the biggest honor, right? It's not about better than or whatever the case may be. And so it just really made me think about that I didn't even realize I was aware of and coming up with what feels like a belief that is almost truer to the person who I am, which is about supporting other people. And the other thing, yeah, I'm still playing with that in my mind. But
Money piece of thing?
yeah, money, but also I think about the sort of legitimacy of certain ways of earning money. I
Oh,
think
okay. Right.
That is a whole other conversation. We'll have that another time, but that is definitely one that I'm working on. So I'll keep posted on that one.
Yes.
Uh, I'm curious because, and we talked about this earlier as well, about how much these beliefs can become a part of us, either be it biologically, subconsciously, within our nervous system, however, multiple ways they become a part of us. How do we separate ourselves from that? How do we figure out, like we just talked about these beliefs about someone coming in and cleaning your house or cooking? How do we separate ourselves from those beliefs and kind of decide what is ours and what belongs to someone else?
I am just such a big fan of asking questions. I always say that curiosity and compassion are always going to be your two biggest friends when it comes to anything. And I think that's asking, why do I believe this?
Mm,
Where did this belief come from? Is this actually mine? And how did I come to this conclusion? I mean, I think that this is such a big problem in the world is that people don't stop to ask themselves questions about why do I actually believe this? And I think it's about paying attention to those patterns that feel kind of sticky. So if you've done all the work, mindset therapy, journaling, and something's still not shifting, I think it's a good chance that it's probably something that was deeply ingrained within you, maybe generations before you even came onto the planet, right? And I think
mm,
also looking at the goal is never to blame our parents or our grandparents or those who came before us. It's really to just reclaim what we actually want to believe. So you get to decide what stays and then what goes, what you continue to hold on to.
mm. I love that. I love those questions and that curiosity. I've always considered myself a curious person, but I've never been a fan of questions until like the last maybe 10 years or so. And when you said that, what I was reminded of as well is very recently, I spotted a belief that I didn't even know I had. And I remember thinking to myself, huh, what else do I believe that is outdated or, not something I want to keep hold of? And so I think it's just for me, it was just a reminder
Mhm.
that, you know, there's so many things that we believe that we can stop believing at any point in time. There may even be something that you've chosen to believe. We're talking about generational patterns, but there may even be something that may not be a generational pattern that you've chosen for yourself that may have served you when you were a teenager and serving you now, right? So I think that I like that question. I like the idea of asking why I believe this, but also like what do I believe? Because I think sometimes we think of things as truths when actually they're just things that we believe. And so for me, if I see a pattern, I'm like, what am I believing about this thing? What do I believe that's keeping me doing this thing? Almost getting to the heart of what it is and then realizing, oh, okay, now I can start to think about it differently.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we could have, you and I offline could have a forever long conversation about, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I used to believe or that I chose to believe. And now I no longer believe those things because I started to actually question those beliefs rather than just allow myself to be spoon fed those beliefs by certain people or communities in my life.
One thing I would say has really helped me to be able to examine my beliefs is traveling. We talked about moving to Nicaragua, and I talked about my friend who is from Nigeria, but a lot of traveling has showed me that people are out there living totally different lives and they're doing all right. I mean, I don't need to do this. Somebody else is out there doing it. They're okay. Maybe I'll be okay too if I do it. And so to me, that has been one thing that has really helped me with those beliefs has been travel. So, just to throw that in there for
Yes.
anybody looking for some ways of examining it. But,
Yes.
this has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed thinking through some of those generational patterns because I think there can be so much freedom
Right.
in choosing what we want to believe and what patterns we want to have. And we may not have that liberty to begin with. We may not start from that blank slate, but I love the idea of making that choice.
And I think that one thing, even as we've gone on talking, that has expanded for me that I didn't even think about before this conversation was, I was really thinking about generational patterns from the lens of family generations being passed down. And what
Mm,
has expanded for me is even looking at generationally, age wise, or when you were born, the generation that you were born into, how that has generational patterns within it as well.
mm,
And to even be thinking about that, and I think that, like I said, it's been so highlighted for me as I look at people who are in their teens and 20s, that people are having career days and they want to be like social media influencers for their career. That's the thing that is like real, or they want to, have YouTube channels or TikTok channels, or I don't even know what they call TikTok things. But I think that that has expanded, and I think that's also something that we can be looking at is not only family generations or familial generations, but generationally within the generation or the year or the
mhm.
decade that you were born, how that impacts
Yeah.
what you believe about the world, yourself, other people, what's possible for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I always remember the very first time I used to present at a lot of career fairs, and I always remember the first time I went in it, and a student who told me they wanted to be a YouTuber, and I was like, "YouTuber? Is that a word? Like,
Right,
what is that?" And now I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be a YouTuber, that'll be great."
right, right.
So I love that so much. And it's so true, there are things that I feel like are a part of me because of the generation I was in. Some of them are amazing, and some of them are like, "I'm gonna let that go. That's trash. I don't want that anymore." So
Right.
I love that realization as well.
So I think that there's pros and cons for as is everything in life. There are pros and cons for growing up in a certain generation and also not.
Yeah, so pros and cons for sure, sure, sure. But this has been such a great conversation
Yeah.
and great.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, before we go, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Feel free to message me on Instagram. I'm at the Alley Rose. And if after listening, you're recognizing that there are generational patterns that you are wanting to shift, you want support in figuring out where to start, head to shiftyourstorypodcast.com or click the link in the show notes to schedule your connection call. I would love to chat about this with you and support you if I can. So, thank you so much for joining us. We're sending you so much love and gratitude. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message on social media. I'm at the Alley Rose on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to be coached on a future episode or explore what it would look like to work with me one-on-one, head over to shiftyourstorypodcast.com. And if you never want to miss an episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps more people find this work. Until next time, keep shifting, keep growing, and most importantly, I want you to remember that your story isn't set in stone. You always have the power to shift it.